Hello and welcome to Mabina TV. This is home of Compassionate Conservatism, where we advocate for a fine balance, a sweet spot between individual creative genius excellence, as afforded by capitalism, and society excellence, as afforded by equality of opportunity. So, in essence, you are calling for capitalism with a human first, that is capitalism with a human first. So, for now, I like to start with Remaking America, and in Remaking America, I'm asking in the making America, I'm asking the former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice says that the reason why Donald Trump did not had a chaotic presidency was that he did not have a prior military or public service experience. That is according to the former Secretary of State. I think she is now, I think, a faculty at Stanford University. So I think she is a faculty at Stanford University. So basically, Condoleezza Rice says that the reason for the chaotic Trump presidency was that he did not have a prior military or public service experience. So why do you think Donald Trump? Is it really necessary to have a public service experience in order to be a great president? I think it depends. I think usually what Donald Trump intended to bring to the White House, what Donald Trump intended to bring to Washington was change, but his change was chaotic. And I think you need change that is orderly. You need change that is orderly, and I think that is where Donald Trump erred. And I think if he had balanced his change message with stability, then I think he could have prevailed. So I think basically Donald Trump, I think, did went too far with the change, but did not have a stable way in order to manage that change. You need a change that is managed, and I don't think Donald Trump had that. I think he would have employed a change agent. Otherwise, he wanted to drain the swamp of the Bush, of the Obama, or even the Bush leftovers. So of course, he was saying drain the swamp. Of course, he wanted some thought he had a personal vendetta with Barack Obama. Some even believe that he was jealous of the record of Obama, but I believe that maybe he thought Barack Obama was a fraud, and I think some Americans believe that Barack Obama was a motivational speaker, but not really someone that could someone that was geared towards ensuring that America was on the right path. So some describe Obama as a motivational speaker. So you had Trump did not have. You had people resigning during the Trump presidency. You had people, a lot of people resigning. You had the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, resigning, and then you had, I think, was it Mike Pompeo that took over that role of Secretary of State. So you had Donald Trump basically having a very chaotic presidency. But of course, some say, I think the problem with Washington a lot of the times is deal making. I think that's the problem with Washington. It is deal making, and I think if you, it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. If you have someone that has been in Washington for too long, then they are mandated to be deal makers. So basically, they are deal makers, and so nothing much gets done. And again, if you have someone new like Donald Trump come to Washington, then they could be overwhelmed by all the change, all the speed that goes on in Washington, and get sucked into the system. So you need someone that has is fairly in the middle, someone that is not too newbie in Washington, so that they could have stamina, so that they could have a backbone to stick it up to those elements that want the old ways of doing things. But also you need someone that is going to freshen up Washington, someone that is going to bring new energy in Washington, so that you can have Washington that functions. And I think many Americans complain that Washington is made up of corruption, that nothing gets moved in Washington, that it is about deal making. And Trump supporters really were hoping that basically he could clean up Washington. Of course, they say that Washington was at the behest of the deep state. Of course, the deep state, these are people. The deep state is a series of people that basically no one has heard of, no one has read in newspapers, no one has seen on TV, but that they call the shots secretly from behind the curtain. So of course the deep state, as someone say, even that they determine who will be the American president maybe decades to come. So basically you can see how very much of power they hold. That is the deep state. But of course for the likes of Donald Trump, their purpose was to come and completely remake the American country. Well, I think the core of Donald Trump was that the middle class, that the American president was not working for the American people anymore. That the core of Trump's message was that Donald Trump was not working for the American people anymore, and that the American president was not working for the American people anymore. That they were working they were working as a behest of the deep state, and I think this is what Donald Trump came to clean along in Washington, but of course he found they're going very, very rough. He did not manage. I think he did not manage to do that, and I think that is why. And then the deep state. That is why I think the deep state had the better hand, and I think in that sense that we can say that Donald Trump did not succeed in having a deep state. That Donald Trump did not succeed in having a deep state that basically a deep state basically that got rid of him. So basically, I think to have change, you need to have both. You need to both be a new BS so that you can bring fresh energy to Washington, but also you need to be invested in the ways of Washington so that you are not overwhelmed by all these change. So that needs to be, I would say, manage the changes. So Donald Trump did not manage to do that, and I think he was the first American president to go straight from Donald Trump was the first American president to go straight from business straight from business to being the American president, and of course you can see how that went. And I don't think maybe a lot of leadership experts say this was not the way to do it. That he needed some experience, but not too much, so that he could just become another deal maker in Washington. Because remember, Washington is in need of new energy. You can see the way was it the former speaker Kevin McCarthy elbowed his colleague. Basically, you can see how low Capitol Hill has sunk. You can see how low lawmakers have sunk. He basically elbowed his colleague, that is the former speaker Kevin McCarthy, and I don't think that is so good for an institution that is supposed to be a bastion of good governance and leadership. So basically, I think Washington is corrupt. Washington needs new energy. Washington basically is in need of new leadership. But I don't think Donald Trump tried. But of course, he came up short. Of course, some say that is in the basic elements of Donald Trump. Some say Donald Trump as a person himself does not espouse the virtues of leadership. That basically Donald Trump himself, going by the dealings of his own people, that basically if you do not worship Donald Trump, he gets rid of you. So that's why some say that is why some say that basically Donald Trump is not the person who should have brought that energy to Washington. And I don't think I think taking from Trump's personal life, I think when he was in The Apprentice, I think or maybe that was just acting. I think he was really invested in the ways. I think he was fairly minded, and I think maybe he would have brought that energy. But of course, then he needed to trim his rough edges. I think when Donald Trump rounds off his rough energy, then he's a fairly capable person. Remember, his real mission, I think, is on the America is no longer winning. I think that's the core message of Donald Trump. That America is no longer winning. America is no longer winning, and I think when the likes of China and I think Russia look at the state of democracy of America, they tell their people, "Do you want that system? Do you need this system? Look at how bureaucracy in America works. You look at how decisions don't get made." So when the likes of Putin tells his people in Russia, or when the likes of China's Xi Jinping tells his people in China, basically look at Washington, look at America, things are not working. Is that the kind of system you want here in America? I think when they tell their people this sort of thing. And then there are people really maybe say maybe democracy as practiced in the West or as practiced in America basically is not the way to go about. And because of this, now America has been blacklisted as a failed as a backsliding democracy by a Swedish democracy advocacy group, and also international commentators label America as a failing democracy, as exhibit A of a failed democracy. So you can see international commentators really labeling America as an exhibit A of a failed democracy. So that's it for now. That was it for now. I looked at the former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice telling Donald Trump saying that the reason for the chaos in the Trump presidency, the reason for the chaotic Trump presidency was because Donald Trump basically was because Donald Trump was the first American president to go from a prior military experience to the first American president to not have a prior military or public service experience. Then I will move over now in ideas. In ideas, I'm asking, should the SAT be abolished? Should American universities go to exception, or should they not require that is applicants submit SAT scores? Of course, it has been said that the SAT score really is not a measure of how someone will perform in the undergraduate studies. That the SAT is not a measure of how someone will perform in the undergraduate studies. That the real measure is the high school GPA. But of course, the SAT has been there, and a lot of course, it was borrowed from the military, so you can't be sure it will not. Of course, it was the requirement that you submit, an applicant submit the SAT scores was done away with during the COVID pandemic, when it became difficult for candidates to be able to sit the SAT scores. But I think right now, I think it has been reinstated that the American colleges now require a candidate to submit the SAT scores. But of course, and then for the American colleges, I think for them it was just about comparing an applicant from school A with a perfect 4.0 GPA and another applicant from school B with the same perfect 4.0 GPA. So how do you compare these two candidates? One from school A with a perfect 4.0 GPA and another candidate from school B with another perfect 4.0 GPA. How do you compare those two candidates? And maybe the SAT could just act as a tiebreaker between these two candidates. But of course, I think a difference of between 10 or 20 points, I think that is just a lottery. But I think a difference of maybe 100, 200 points, then that shows maybe there is an acute IQ difference between the two applicants. So you can imagine that someone has an SAT maybe of 1550 and another an SAT of 1150. So maybe it shows the SAT of 1550 maybe has maybe a higher aptitude than the one with the SAT score of 1150. But I think some people say the SAT really is a measure of the wealth income bracket of an applicant rather than the aptitude, because there is this whole test prep, college prep market, and one of those elements is the SAT preparation. So there are a lot of coaches that can train you to go from an SAT of 1000 to an SAT of 1500. So you can imagine. So if someone comes from a fairly well-off family, an upper middle class family to a rich family, then they can prep their kid, they can prep their son or daughter to be able to go and sit for those SAT prep classes, and they will emerge with a 1550 or maybe even a 1600 perfect SAT score. So there is this whole SAT prep, college prep market, and I think one of the elements then is the SAT, and I think then they say the SAT really is a measure of the wealth income bracket rather than a measure of your IQ. And I think a lot of colleges, or maybe what these colleges should do, is to have a common entrance exam. If they can can't find a way to, if they can't find a way to maybe compare candidate A and candidate B from school A that has a 4.0 GPA with another candidate that has another also 4.0 GPA, or maybe they should they could have a common entrance exam made up of a leading university so that you sit for the actual academic test, not just an aptitude but an academic subject, let's say chemistry, let's say physics, or they do that in the AP, but I think that does not go far enough. I think they need to do I think a lot of students that do well in the AP come from very elite very elite private high schools. And I think what these colleges could do is they could form a consortium so that they can have a common entrance exam, as happens maybe in the UK, where you have the Cambridge exams being the entry criteria for joining college. But of course, some dispute that one single exam should be the way it should be joining college, or maybe they have in China with the Gaokao test. Of course, some Americans will dispute that. They will say that the system there is encumbered with inefficiencies, basically where you have a 3-day test determining your whole life apparently. So they say this should not be the case for American students that are applying to college. But I think they could use that test to compare candidates, and I think if American consortium of colleges could have a common entrance exam, and then we could have maybe then the SAT could be done away with. But now I don't think there is a way to compare a candidate from school A that has done exceptionally well, has a 4.0 GPA, and another candidate from school B that has the same 4.0 GPA. I think right now what these colleges do, I'm not privy to the inner politics of the admissions process, but I think what they do is that they have relationship. They have 100-year history of 100-year history with this prep elite high school. So basically, a lot of these high schools have a relationship with colleges such as Harvard or Yale or Princeton or MIT or Stanford. And so basically, they have a history with these colleges, these elite private high schools. So I think they tend to maybe supply most of the students. They call them the feeder high schools. But then, of course, these colleges find it very hard to gauge successfully candidates from lesser known high schools who the colleges have no relationship with. They have never admitted a candidate from, and maybe that should be the work of this admission officials. The work of these admission officials should be to cast the net wider, so that they know maybe they can be able to they will be able to go maybe to expand the catchment area of their students, so that they also have students drawn from lesser known schools, not just from the Phillips Exeter High Schools or the Phillips Andover or Harvard Westlake Academy, Harvard Westlake Academy or Groton High School, or maybe other maybe Thomas Jefferson High School. So they have this series of elite high schools, but I think they need to cast their net wider so that they can if we really are to make these colleges to be the what I would call centers of meritocracy or centers of equality of opportunity, because they say you have a 60% higher chance of joining the 1% of Americans if you go to an elite American college. So if you go to Harvard, if you go to Yale, if you go to Dartmouth, if you go to Princeton, if you go to MIT, if you go to Stanford, then you have a higher 60% chance of joining the 1% of American income bracket, and so that is increasing your chances your odds significantly. And I think that shows that basically if these colleges make it if you make it to these colleges, then chances are high that basically you could make it to the 1% of Americans. And I think that is why the admission rates keep going down. I think as I last checked, I think at Harvard it's at about 3.5%, so 3.3%. So these admission rates keep going down, and I think for universities they advertise this record low admission rates as that makes them rank highly in the college admissions process. So basically, the lower the admission rate, the higher the exclusivity of that college, and so that means it puts a higher ranking for that college. And I think right now it is Harvard that ranks quite highly in that case, and so in that case then you have Harvard that ranks highly in this case, followed by other colleges such as Yale or Princeton or MIT or Stanford. But I think you had Princeton say it will not be announcing its admission rate, but of course then you can't be sure, but it will still be ranked highly there. I'm sure the people who prepare these lists, such as US News and World Ranking, will find other ways to maybe they will have leaks of the admission rate, and basically they will be able to rank Princeton. So I think the SAT is a good gauge of how you can maybe comparing a candidate A that got a 4.0 GPA from school A against another candidate that got also 4.0 GPA from school B, but of course it does not go far enough. I think there needs to be a common entrance exam for this. Maybe these colleges should form a consortium so that we have a common entrance exam, and I think if that happens, then there will be a way to maybe test whether how well these students will do, and really do the job that the defenders of SAT say they will do. That is, compare two candidates from different schooling systems, and not just different schooling systems, different countries that have vastly different schooling systems. So that's it. And then I will move over to Africa perspectives. And in Africa perspectives, there is another opposition win. There is another opposition win in Liberia. That is Joseph Boakai. So Joseph Boakai has narrowly beaten the incumbent President George Weah by just 28,000 votes. So you can see, even as there are military coups in that region of Africa, has been incumbent by a lot of military coups. So you had a military coup in Guinea, you had a military coup in Guinea, you had a military coup in Niger, you had a military coup in Gabon, you had a military coup in Burkina Faso, you had a military coup in Mali. So in the last 3 years, there have been about 5 or 6 military coups in that region of Africa, and that does not bode well for democracy in West Africa or democracy in Africa generally. So whenever I see an opposition candidate win an election in fair and square, and then the losing incumbent president accepts those results, I see that as a progress for democracy in Africa. And I think this tussling around, because these transitions, running against an incumbent president, usually you need to win by boatloads of votes. You need to win by millions and millions of votes so that the incumbent president can accept the results. And usually when it's just a very narrow win, such as the one that has happened in Liberia, where the incumbent president George Weah has won by 28,000 votes, that's by the slimmest of margin. And then the president has accepted the result and said that basically the people of Liberia have won. I will say that this is a win for democracy, not just in Liberia, but the whole region of West Africa and Africa, frankly, because I think this change of power through the ballot is not working in many countries, and that is why there is a lot of military coups in Africa. And I would hope that this military coups in Africa stop, so that we can have the way to change a government in Africa, then should be through the ballot, and should be through the ballot and not through military coups, and that will enhance democracy in Africa, so that you will have an African democracy that works, so that power changes hands to the ballot. And I think there have been opposition wins, so we could begin in the last decade. In 2015, there was, I think, our opposition candidate is now retired president, of course, Muhammadu Buhari beat the incumbent president then, Goodluck Jonathan. Then you had in 2016 the outgoing president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, beat the incumbent president John Mahama. Then in The same year, 2016, you had another candidate, Adama Barrow of Gambia, beating the incumbent president, the 21-year running dictator, Yahya Jammeh, and then in 2020, you had the incumbent president, the opposition candidate, Lazarus Chakwera, beating the opposition candidate, the incumbent president, Peter Mutharika, and then recently, in 2021, you had the opposition candidate, Hakainde Hichilema, beating the incumbent president, Edgar Lungu. Of course, Edgar Lungu has announced that he will be back to politics. Of course, I think now his retirement package has been suspended because he has said he will be returning to politics. Of course, he has said he had announced that he will be retiring from politics, but now he says he will be back to the ballot in 2026. So now his retirement package has been suspended. So you can see kind of his dilemma. Now he is, but I think he's a very popular president right now in Zambia. He is a very popular president in Zambia, and I think he will win comfortably because I think he has hired about almost a million civil servants. So you can see how very much I think his citizens, I think they love the job that he is doing, and I think they will re-elect him back. So you can see how very much opposition candidates have won, but these are very few. Compared to the military coup, they are less, but I think we need to be able to maybe cheer on whenever an opposition candidate wins, because it's very hard to beat an incumbent president in Africa. It's very hard to beat an incumbent president in Africa because they choose the electoral referee. In most countries at least, they choose the electoral referee. They choose the person who is going to be presiding over the election. They have the courts. They choose the chief justice. They choose the top judges. They have the military. They have the police. So it's very hard to beat an incumbent president in Africa. So when it happens that an opposition candidate beats an incumbent president by however few votes, then it means they were very popular in the first place. They control the media. The incumbent president controls the media. So you can see how very much it is. Hard to beat an incumbent president in Africa. So I hope that I hope going by this that there will be more opposition wins in Africa, so that we can have. Frankly, we need democracy. We need. Look at the way it happens in America. It is an incumbent president who complained that he had been rigged out. It is the other way in the United States, that it is an incumbent president who complained that he had been rigged out. But of course, for Africa, it is unheard of for an incumbent president to complain that he had been rigged off. And so I think we need a culture where an incumbent president loses an election by however slimmest of margins. And I think if that happens, then the democracy in Africa will be sustained. Democracy in Africa will reach new heights, and I think that is the way to promote democracy in Africa. We need this new energy of idealism in Africa. We need this new energy of populism. We need this new ideology, and I think the fact of the matter is that we need to move away from this populist kind of politics, because in Africa often the delineation between the opposition party and the ruling party is not in ideology, an infrastructure plan, a healthcare plan, an education plan, call it a jobs plan. That is not the delineation between the opposition and the ruling party. The delineation is in the region and tribe where the candidates are drawn from. So basically, if a candidate the opposition candidate usually comes from an opposing tribe A, maybe or region B, and then the ruling party candidate comes from tribe C or region D, and I think that is the way elections are organized in Africa, and maybe that is why elections are so chaotic, because it is a real nihilistic warfare between tribe A and tribe B. There's nothing about idea A and idea B clashing. It is all about tribe A and tribe B clashing, region A and region B clashing. That is why during times of elections there is usually violence, because now it is thought that these people are going to eat. It is their time to eat. These people are going to take all the a national cake. These people are going to eat the national cake. So during the elections in Africa, it is a whole nihilistic affair, nihilistic warfare, and that is why elections are very tumultuous times in Africa, are very unstable times in Africa, and that is why during election times, basically, it is tribe A versus tribe B going for each other throats, and I don't think that augurs well for the future of stability in Africa. We need really stability in Africa that is assured. We need stability in Africa, and that is why we need basically democracy that is anchored along. We need democracy that is anchored along ideas, ideology, and I think that is how we will basically make sure that we have people, and that is how we'll make sure that we have a change of guard that is peaceful, that is very democratic, and also politics that is about ideas. We need politics in Africa that is about ideas. So that's it for now, and then finally I will move to heart and soul. How do we have faith that moves mountains? How do we have faith that moves mountains? Of course, it is said that Abraham is the father of faith because God told him that he would be a father of many nations. Basically, he would be a father of many nations. At that time, Abraham had only a child with his servant, that is a guy that is Ishmael. He had not born his own child with his wife, with his own wife, Sarah. They were about 80, 90 years old. And of course, when God told him that you will be a father of many nations, your descendants will be like the stars in the sky, your descendants will be like basically sand in the sea. He did not believe, and that is the mark of faith. And again, he demonstrated another mark of faith when he was told by God that basically you will basically go and sacrifice your child for me, that is Isaac. And basically he said, even though it was painful, he decided to go. And when he was about to just begin slaughtering Isaac, then God told him there is a sheep just beside him that he should slaughter that sheep. So you can see how very much Abraham, you can see how very much Abraham you can see how very much Abraham was basically the father of faith. And I think if we had that faith, imagine if we had that faith that moves mountains, and you can see very much it is not even Christians who have that faith. Imagine how the world would be if we had that faith. The world, for most part, things are not moving because Christians don't have that faith. We are not living lives, we are not doers of the word. They said faith without action is dead, and so our faith does not have actions, and that is why I believe that we need to be having that faith, a faith that moves mountains, faith that has actions, and this is the way I believe we could be really be the fathers of faith like Abraham, and we could see light where others only see darkness. So that's it for now. I have looked in America, I have looked at what does it mean for Donald Trump, for Condoleezza Rice to say the reason for the chaotic Trump presidency was that basically Trump was the first American president not to have a prior military or public service experience. Then in ideas I looked at whether the SAT should be abolished, whether American colleges should go test optional, and then in Africa perspectives I look at the recent win in Liberia by the opposition candidate Joseph Boakai, who beat the incumbent President George Weah by about 28,000 votes. And then finally I looked what does it mean for Christians to have faith that moves mountains. So that's it for now. That has been Mabinda TV. This is home of Compassionate Conservatism, in which you advocate for a fine balance, a sweet spot between individual creative genius excellence as afforded by capitalism and society excellence as afforded by equality of opportunity. So in essence, we are calling for capitalism with a human first, that is capitalism with a human first.